A little boy says to a billionaire CEO, "Hey sir. My mom has a picture of you in her purse." The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the city park, painting everything in shades of amber and warmth. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of towering oaks, carrying with it the distant sound of children's laughter and the rhythmic barking of dogs chasing after frisbees. The world moved at an unhurried pace here, a stark contrast to the relentless march of time in boardrooms and corporate offices. For Nathaniel Cole, this world was foreign, an oasis in a life dominated by financial forecasts, stock market shifts, and the never-ending cycle of acquisitions and mergers. He was a man who did not belong in stillness. His life was carefully curated, built on discipline, strategy, and an iron grip on control. As CEO of Cole Tech, one of the most powerful tech empires in the country, Nathaniel's world revolved around decisions that impacted thousands, numbers that dictated millions, and a calendar so rigidly packed that leisure was an abstract concept rather than a reality. Yet, today, for the first time in years, he had left his phone behind. No assistant tracking his movements. No team awaiting his final approval. Just a simple walk in the park. Something he hadn't done since he was a boy. And yet, even in solitude, his thoughts betrayed him. Loneliness, the kind he never admitted to, lurked beneath the surface, amplified by the absence of his usual distractions. There was a peculiar ache in his chest, one he refused to name. One that had begun to fester despite his carefully curated success. It was the kind of emptiness that no amount of wealth or power could fill. Nathaniel adjusted the cuffs of his tailored charcoal suit, an odd choice for a park stroll. But old habits died hard. He walked along the gravel path, observing the world with detached curiosity. A street performer blew bubbles into the air, children squealing in delight as they chased the iridescent orbs. A little boy, no older than 7 or 8, caught Nathaniel's eye, not because he was particularly different from the others, but because of the sheer exuberance with which he moved. His sandy brown hair caught the sunlight, and his laughter, pure, unrestrained, carried through the air like a melody. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, Nathaniel found himself smiling. Then, just as suddenly, the boy stopped mid-chase and turned. Their eyes met across the distance, wide, blue, and filled with the kind of innocent curiosity Nathaniel had long forgotten. The boy tilted his head slightly, as if trying to place a familiar face, before trotting toward him without hesitation. "Hey, mister." The boy's voice rang with excitement, his sneakers crunching against the gravel as he stopped in front of Nathaniel. "My mom has a picture of you in her purse." Nathaniel blinked, caught completely off guard. Of all the things he had expected today, this was not one of them. "She does?" His voice, usually commanding in boardrooms, now held an unfamiliar softness. He crouched slightly, leveling himself with the boy. "Are you sure it's me?" The boy nodded enthusiastically, his bright blue eyes shimmering with certainty. "Yeah, I saw it once. It's kinda old, though. You look younger in it. But it's definitely you." Nathaniel's mind raced, flipping through countless possibilities. Over the years, he had been photographed at galas, business summits, and charity events. There were countless magazines, news articles, and online publications that featured his image. But the way this boy spoke, it wasn't as if his mother had found his picture. She kept it. "Why?" He swallowed the sudden lump in his throat. "What's your name, kid?" "Leo." The boy grinned. "That's my dog over there. His name's Duke. Want to see him do a trick?" A genuine chuckle escaped Nathaniel, rare, unguarded. There was something about Leo's unfiltered enthusiasm that was disarming, like a breath of fresh air after being trapped in a suffocating room for too long. "Maybe in a minute." "Leo, can you tell me where your mom is?" Leo, utterly unbothered, simply pointed across the park. Nathaniel followed the direction of his small, outstretched hand, and his entire world shifted. There, sitting on a weathered bench beneath the shade of an oak tree, was a woman. One who had once been part of a life Nathaniel had left behind. Elena Monroe. His breath hitched. She was lost in the pages of a book, seemingly oblivious to the world around her. Though one glance at Leo proved that even in stillness, her attention was tethered to her son. Time had softened her features but had not stolen the quiet strength in her eyes. The same elegance, the same effortless grace, yet something about her had changed. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel felt something close to fear. Clenching his jaw, he exhaled slowly. It had been over a decade. A different lifetime. And yet, in a single heartbeat, it was as if the years between them had collapsed. The weight of the past pressed against his chest. Unrelenting and unforgiving. That's her, Leo confirmed, bouncing on his heels. Her name's Mom, but other people call her Elena. Nathaniel's pulse roared in his ears. Elena. The name rang in his head like an echo, dragging behind it 1,000 memories. Some long buried, some never truly forgotten. The late-night conversations, whispered dreams of a future that never came. The warmth of her laughter. The silent way she had understood him when no one else did. The last time he had seen her, standing on the platform of a train station. Tears in her eyes, as he left without looking back. And now, here she was, in a park, with a son who had blue eyes. Nathaniel's throat went dry. I think, he said, standing, his voice quieter now. I think I need to meet your mom. Leo shrugged, as if the most natural thing in the world was dragging a billionaire across a park. Okay, come on. Without hesitation, he grabbed Nathaniel's hand, small fingers curling around his palm with the trust of a child who did not know the weight of history. Nathaniel followed, his heart pounding in a way no business deal ever had. Each step toward Elena felt like stepping into the past, a past he thought had been buried. A past he might not be ready to face. And yet, here it was, waiting for him, in the shape of a woman he once loved and a boy who had just changed everything. Nathaniel Cole felt his pulse in his throat, an unsteady drumbeat against his otherwise controlled exterior. Each step toward the woman on the bench felt heavier than the last. As if he were walking through thick sand. As if the weight of a decade's worth of unspoken words had suddenly wrapped themselves around his ankles. Daring him to stop. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Leo, oblivious to the storm raging within him, continued to pull him forward. His small hand confidently gripping Nathaniel's like they had known each other for years. His trust, unshaken, only made the moment more surreal. Why was this child, this boy with blue eyes, so comfortable with him? Nathaniel had built his life on calculated decisions, on careful strategies. But this was a collision of fate. A script he had not written. A story he had no control over. And then, suddenly, there she was, Elena Monroe. At first, she didn't see him. She was staring at the open book in her lap, her fingers resting lightly against the pages, lost in the kind of stillness Nathaniel had forgotten how to recognize. But when she lifted her gaze and saw him, her entire body went still. Her fingers twitched around the spine of her book, gripping it tightly, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her lips parted slightly, and though no words came out, Nathaniel saw the flicker of disbelief in her dark eyes. She blinked once, twice, and then, as if she had to convince herself that she wasn't imagining things, she stood up slowly. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world around them continued. The park still buzzed with life. Children still ran, laughter still danced through the air. The sun still poured golden warmth over the afternoon. But in that moment, for Nathaniel and Elena, time didn't move forward. It rewound. Back to a version of themselves that no longer existed. Back to a past where they had been young, reckless in their love, dreaming of forever with no knowledge of how cruel time could be. Nathaniel took a sharp breath, trying to force himself back into the present, into reality. Elena. Her name tasted unfamiliar on his tongue, yet it still held the remnants of an old longing, of a time when saying her name had felt like breathing. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. Nathaniel. Leo glanced between them, clearly sensing something in the air that he didn't quite understand. Mom, do you know him? Elena hesitated, blinking away the storm in her gaze before shifting it down toward her son. Nathaniel watched as she quickly forced a smile, a mask, carefully placed. Yes, sweetheart, she said gently, her voice deceptively calm. I knew him a long time ago. Knew. Past tense. Something about that word made Nathaniel's stomach twist. But before he could process it, Leo grinned up at him. Cool, that makes sense 'cause you look kinda like me. Nathaniel felt his breath hitch. Elena's body tensed immediately, and she reached for Leo's hand, pulling him gently but firmly against her side. Leo, why don't you take Duke over by the fountain for a bit? Just for a few minutes? Leo's face twisted in mild disappointment. But Mom, Leo. Her voice was soft but undeniable in its authority. Nathaniel saw it then, the protective edge in her posture. The way her body stood slightly in front of Leo's. As if shielding him from something unseen. Or someone. Nathaniel. The realization settled into his chest like a slow, suffocating weight. Leo, clearly sensing the shift in her tone, sighed but nodded. Okay, he muttered, trudging away toward the fountain with Duke trailing at his side. And just like that, Nathaniel and Elena were alone. A silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. For a moment, neither of them spoke, neither of them moved. Then, Elena inhaled sharply, her shoulders straightening. I didn't expect to see you here. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, shoving his hands into his pockets as if that would somehow steady him. Neither did I. Her gaze flickered toward Leo before coming back to him. Dark and unreadable. What are you doing here? Nathaniel? The way she said his name, it wasn't warm. It wasn't nostalgic. It was wary. Nathaniel swallowed. I was just walking. Her lips pressed together, clearly unconvinced. You were just walking? She repeated, her voice quiet, but edged with something sharp. Through this park? Through this part of the city? Nathaniel clenched his jaw. She had always been able to read him too well. Elena, he said carefully. Is he? No. The answer came too quickly. Too firmly. Nathaniel felt a sharp pang in his chest. I didn't even finish my question. He said. You don't need to. Elena said, her fingers curling around the strap of her purse. Leo isn't your son. She was lying. Nathaniel knew it the second the words left her mouth. He had built an empire on understanding people. On knowing when someone was bluffing. When someone was hiding something. When someone was twisting the truth to protect something else. And Elena was hiding something. She refused to look at him directly. Her posture too rigid. Her grip too tight on her purse, as if it were a shield between them. Nathaniel took a slow step forward, keeping his voice measured. Why do you still have a picture of me in your purse? Elena's breath hitched. For a fraction of a second, her mask cracked, but then she steeled herself, lifting her chin in that defiant way he still remembered. It's just an old picture. Nathaniel, nothing more, nothing more. He didn't believe that, not for a second. Nathaniel studied her, his mind racing. Why carry it with you after all these years? Elena's gaze darkened. It's none of your business. Nathaniel exhaled, tilting his head slightly. It is if you're keeping something from me. She stiffened. The wind blew between them, stirring the strands of her dark hair, lifting the weight of old memories, of choices that had been made long ago, choices that had changed everything. Elena, Nathaniel said again, quieter this time, tell me the truth. A long, painful silence stretched between them. Elena's fingers twitched. Then, slowly, her gaze flickered toward Leo. Nathaniel followed her eyes, his chest tightening at the sight of the boy, so full of life. So full of something painfully familiar. And in that moment, he knew in the way his heart clenched. In the way his mind refused to silence the truth screaming inside of him. Leo was his son. Nathaniel's stomach dropped. His pulse roared in his ears. Elena must have seen the realization in his face. Because before he could speak, before he could demand the truth, she did something that made his chest ache. She took a slow step back. Her fingers curled around the strap of her purse even tighter. Her eyes, filled with something dangerously close to fear, searched his. Nathaniel, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the park. Please, don't. It wasn't a plea of weakness. It was a plea of desperation. She was begging him not to pull apart the life she had built. But Nathaniel couldn't walk away from this. He had to know. He had to know. Because if Leo was his son, if he had missed out on 8 years of his child's life, then nothing in the world would stop him from making up for lost time. Nathaniel Cole had spent his life negotiating billion-dollar deals, facing ruthless competitors, and making decisions that shaped industries. But as he stood in the park, staring at Elena Monroe's guarded expression, he realized that none of those experiences had prepared him for this moment. Nothing had prepared him for the quiet devastation of looking at a woman he once loved and realizing she had been keeping something from him, something that had changed the course of both their lives. And that something was named Leo. Elena's hands clenched around the strap of her purse as if the thin piece of leather could hold together the wall she had built between them. The wind stirred strands of her dark hair. But her eyes, those eyes he had once memorized like scripture, remained unreadable. Nathaniel had faced adversaries who could lie straight to his face and convince entire rooms to believe them. But Elena wasn't a liar. She had never been. Which meant she was hiding something, not just out of self-preservation, but out of fear. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, controlling the storm of emotions surging through him. He had to be careful. If he pushed too hard, she would shut down completely, and he would lose whatever fragile bridge still existed between them. So he started with the one question that had been burning in his mind since the moment Leo had approached him. "Elena, why do you have a picture of me in your purse?" Her fingers tightened around the bag. "It's nothing," she said too quickly. "Just an old photograph." Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice gentle but unrelenting. "Then why carry it with you?" She flinched. "Just barely." But he saw it. "Elena," he continued, "people don't keep photographs of their past unless that past still means something." Her jaw clenched, and for a moment, it looked like she was going to shut him out completely. But then, as if some unseen force had worn her down, she sighed and slowly pulled the purse closer, hesitating before unzipping it. Nathaniel held his breath. She reached inside, fingers trembling, and pulled out a small, slightly worn photograph. She didn't hand it to him right away. Instead, she stared at it, her expression distant, like she was staring into a past only she could see. Finally, she placed it on the bench between them. Nathaniel picked it up carefully, like it was something fragile, something that might break if he held it too tightly. His breath caught in his throat. It was an old photograph, from another lifetime. A younger version of himself stood beside Elena, his arms slung casually around her shoulders. They were both smiling, both radiating the kind of happiness that was effortless, unburdened. He remembered this day. They had taken a trip to the lake just before he left for college. It had been one of those long, golden afternoons where time had felt endless, where the world had been nothing more than her laughter, the warmth of the sun and the quiet certainty that they had their whole lives ahead of them. Except they hadn't, because he had left, and she had stayed behind. Nathaniel's fingers tightened around the edges of the photograph. "I remember this." Elena nodded but didn't speak. His throat felt dry. "I didn't think you'd still have this." Her lips pressed together. "I didn't, for a long time," she admitted softly. "I found it years later, tucked into an old book." Nathaniel looked up. "And you kept it?" She hesitated, something flickering in her eyes. "I don't know why," she said, but Nathaniel could hear the lie in her voice. He placed the photograph down between them and exhaled sharply. There was more to this. More to the way she was holding herself together. "Elena," he said, quieter now, "why won't you just tell me the truth?" She looked away, swallowing hard. "Because the truth won't change anything." He stared at her, studying the quiet pain in her expression, the tension in her hands, the weight of years she had carried alone. Maybe she was right. Maybe the truth wouldn't change the past, but it might change the future. And right now, Nathaniel couldn't shake the feeling that the future was standing right in front of him, staring at him with bright blue eyes and calling him, "Mr. Leo." Nathaniel's voice wavered slightly as he looked toward the boy, who was now sitting near the fountain, chatting with another child. He turned back to Elena. "Is he mine?" Her body visibly tensed, and for a long moment, she said nothing. Then, her hands curled into fists, and her shoulders slumped, like she had been carrying a weight for too long. And this moment was the final straw. "No." Nathaniel felt that word like a punch to the gut. But then, why did it feel like a lie? Something inside him screamed that she wasn't telling the whole story, that there was a reason she was so desperate to push him away, to keep this secret buried. And that reason was staring him in the face. Nathaniel took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Then tell me who his father is." Elena's breath hitched. For the first time, genuine panic flickered in her eyes. Nathaniel saw the hesitation, the guilt, the fear, and he knew. He knew before she even spoke. Because if Leo wasn't his, why couldn't she just say a name? Why was she standing there, gripping her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright? "Elena," he whispered, his voice almost pleading now. "Please." Her eyes shimmered, but she refused to meet his gaze. And then, finally, in a voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it, she broke. "Because I didn't want to hold you back." Nathaniel's stomach plummeted, his hands clenched at his sides. "What?" Alina's breath trembled as she finally lifted her gaze. And in that moment, he saw it. The truth. The guilt. The years of sleepless nights. Of choices made alone. Of sacrifices she had never spoken aloud. "Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Leo is your son." The world tilted. Nathaniel staggered back, the breath stolen from his lungs. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even disbelief. It was the realization of everything he had lost. 8 years. 8 years of first words. First steps. First birthdays. 8 years of a life he hadn't even known existed. Nathaniel turned, looking at Leo, who was now tossing a stick for Duke, laughing as the dog bounded after it, so full of life. So blissfully unaware of the storm unraveling just feet away. And in that moment, everything Nathaniel thought he knew came crashing down. He had spent years building an empire. But he had never built a family. He had chased success. But he had never chased the things that truly mattered. And now, standing in front of the only woman he had ever truly loved and the son he never knew he had, Nathaniel realized one thing with absolute clarity. He had a choice. He could walk away, or he could fight for the one thing that had ever really mattered. He turned back to Elena, his voice resolute. "I missed 8 years. He took a breath, his voice steady. "I'm not missing anymore." Elena's eyes filled with tears. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel wasn't sure if he was terrified or finally alive. Nathaniel Cole had spent his entire life piecing together puzzles, finding hidden opportunities in financial markets, predicting outcomes before they happened. But this was different. This wasn't a business deal or a corporate decision. This was his son, and the woman he had once loved had kept him in the dark. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest, leaving him staggered, breathless. He felt like he had walked into a life that had existed without him. A world where he had been absent from the most important moments, the first steps, the first words, the scraped knees and bedtime stories. He had missed them all. He had never imagined himself as a father. Never thought about what it meant to watch a child grow, to shape a life, to hear a small voice call him dad. And now, he wasn't sure whether to be furious or devastated. Elena had lied to him. She had looked him in the eye, knowing, without a doubt, that Leo was his, and told him he wasn't. Nathaniel clenched his jaw, forcing down the emotions rising in his chest. He needed answers. He deserved answers. That night, sleep was impossible. He sat in his penthouse, the skyline stretching out in front of him, the city pulsing with life. He was usually at peace here, surrounded by everything he had worked for. But tonight, it all felt empty. The leather couch, the expensive scotch, the cold silence, none of it mattered anymore. Because somewhere in this city, his son was sleeping without knowing his father existed. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, staring at his reflection in the glass window. He barely recognized himself. He looked like a man who had lost something he didn't even know he had. And the worst part? He had. Nathaniel grabbed his phone, his fingers hovering over Elena's contact. He could call her, demand the truth, demand that she explain why she had done this to him. But he knew Elena. She wouldn't budge, not unless she had no choice. His fingers tightened around the phone. He needed proof. He needed the truth. And so, against every instinct screaming at him that this was crossing a line, he made a call. Daniel Carter. The voice on the other end was calm, efficient, the same way it always was. "I need you to look into someone," Nathaniel said. His voice clipped. "Her name is Elena Monroe. She has a son. I need to know if he's mine." There was a pause. Daniel knew what Nathaniel was asking. And for the first time, his usually unshakable investigator hesitated. "Nathaniel, are you sure you want to do this?" Nathaniel exhaled, his grip on the phone tightening. "I don't have a choice." Silence. "Then, I'll see what I can find." Nathaniel hung up, tossing his phone onto the couch. His heart was pounding, his hands clenched into fists. This wasn't how he had wanted to do this. But Elena had left him with no other option. He had to know. The next 3 days were torture. Nathaniel went through the motions, meetings, business deals, boardroom discussions, but his mind was never really there. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Leo's face, the bright blue eyes, the infectious smile, and worst of all, the feeling that some part of him already knew the truth. He had spent years running from emotions, from attachments, from anything that could slow him down. But now, he wasn't running anymore. By the time Daniel finally called, Nathaniel's hands were shaking. "I have the information you wanted," Daniel said. Nathaniel didn't breathe. "Tell me." There was a pause. Then, with quiet certainty, Daniel spoke the words that would change everything. "Leo is your son." Nathaniel stopped breathing. The room around him blurred. The city skyline became nothing but flashing lights in the background. He had known. Deep down, he had known. But hearing the confirmation, knowing it was real, it was like the air had been stolen from his lungs. 8 years. 8 years of missed birthdays. Missed milestones. Missed moments that he could never get back. 8 years of Leo growing up without him. Nathaniel had never regretted anything in his life. Not once. Until now. He swallowed hard, gripping the edge of his desk as if it could ground him. Does he know? Daniel hesitated. No. Nathaniel's jaw tensed. That was it. That was the final blow. Elena hadn't just hidden Leo from him, she had hidden him from Leo. Nathaniel had been erased. His son had no idea who he was. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel didn't know what to do. Did he go to Elena? Did he demand an explanation? Did he barge into her life and tell Leo the truth, whether she wanted him to or not? Or did he walk away? No, he couldn't walk away. He had done that once before. All those years ago, when he had chosen his career over love. And he had lost everything because of it. He wouldn't lose Leo too. The next morning, Nathaniel found himself standing outside Elena's apartment. The weight of what he was about to do pressed against his chest. Suffocating. Inescapable. But this time, he didn't hesitate. This time, he knocked. When Elena opened the door, she froze. Nathaniel saw the exhaustion in her face. The years of carrying a secret that had eaten away at her. He didn't wait for her to speak. "I know." Her breath caught. Nathaniel stepped forward, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. "I know he's mine, Elena." Tears pooled in her eyes. But she didn't deny it. She couldn't deny it. Nathaniel's voice broke. "Why? Why did you keep him from me?" Her hands trembled. "Because I thought I was doing the right thing." Nathaniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You thought keeping my son from me was the right thing?" She looked away, blinking back tears. "You had your whole life ahead of you, Nathaniel. You were chasing your dreams. I didn't want to be the reason you gave them up." Nathaniel stared at her. And for the first time, he saw it. She hadn't just been protecting Leo. She had been protecting him. But it didn't change the fact that he had lost 8 years. "I deserve to know him, Elena," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And he deserves to know me." A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Elena nodded. Nathaniel's breath shook. He had fought for billion-dollar companies. Had built an empire from the ground up. Had faced men who would have torn him apart if given the chance. But this was the most important fight of his life. And he wasn't going to lose. Nathaniel needs your support now more than ever. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances and the power of family, hit that like button. Comment below. What would you do in his shoes? Would you fight for the truth? Would you fight for a child who didn't even know you existed? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories like this one. Because sometimes, the most important battles aren't fought in boardrooms. They're fought for the people we love. And Nathaniel? He's just getting started. Nathaniel Cole had faced impossible challenges before. He had built an empire from the ground up, fought through ruthless competition, and made decisions that had altered the course of industries. He had survived betrayals, sleepless nights, and the unrelenting pressure of always staying at the top. But nothing had prepared him for this. For the knowledge that he had a son. For the gut-wrenching realization that he had spent 8 years of his life unaware of the one thing that truly mattered. And worse, someone had taken that time away from him. Elena Monroe. She had stood before him, tears in her eyes, regret in her voice, and admitted the truth he had suspected all along. Leo was his son. And now, as Nathaniel stood in his penthouse, alone, staring out at the sprawling city skyline, he felt a kind of pain he had never known before. It was deeper than anger. Deeper than betrayal. It was loss. He had missed everything. Leo's first words, his first steps, his first day of school, his birthdays, his scraped knees, his laughter, his bedtime stories. Nathaniel had spent years chasing the next success, the next achievement, convinced that was what life was about. And all the while, his son had been growing up without him. His jaw clenched, his grip tightening on the edge of the counter. This wasn't just about what had been stolen from him. It was about what had been stolen from Leo. He had grown up without a father, without knowing where he came from, without knowing that, somewhere out there, a man had existed who would have done anything for him, if only he had known. Nathaniel's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his spiraling thoughts. It was Daniel Carter, his investigator. "Did you find out anything else?" Nathaniel asked, his voice clipped, his frustration barely contained. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah," Daniel finally said, his tone hesitant. "I dug deeper." Nathaniel braced himself. "Elena's been struggling financially." Nathaniel's heart lurched. "What? She works full-time as a nurse." Daniel continued, "But she's been doing double shifts to make ends meet. From what I can tell, she never took any financial help. No loans, no government aid. She's been raising Leo entirely on her own." Nathaniel sank into a chair, pressing a hand to his forehead. She had done it all alone. While he had been living in luxury, jetting across the world, making billion-dollar deals, existing in the kind of wealth most people could only dream of, Elena had been exhausting herself just to keep food on the table. And she had never told him. Not once. Nathaniel's throat tightened. He had spent so much time feeling betrayed that he hadn't stopped to think about why she had done what she did. Had it been wrong? Yes. But had she been afraid? Had she believed, even for a second, that keeping him away was somehow protecting Leo? Nathaniel had always prided himself on his ability to see things clearly, to analyze situations without letting emotions cloud his judgment. But this wasn't business. This was personal. And for the first time in his life, he realized that he had never truly known what it meant to lose something. Until now. Nathaniel stood abruptly, determination settling over him like steel. He wasn't going to sit back and dwell on the past. He was going to fight for his son. The next evening, Nathaniel was back outside Elena's apartment. He hadn't called ahead. He hadn't given her time to prepare. Because this conversation wasn't going to wait. When she opened the door, her face was a mix of surprise and wariness. "Nathaniel." Her voice was tight. "What are you doing here?" He exhaled slowly, keeping his voice steady. "We need to talk." Elena hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "Leo's asleep." "Good," Nathaniel said, stepping inside before she could stop him. "Because this conversation is about him." She closed the door behind him, crossing her arms. "Nathaniel, I already told you the truth. What else do you want?" His jaw clenched. "I want to know why." She blinked. "Why didn't you tell me?" Nathaniel's voice was raw, heavy with emotion. "Why did you let me miss 8 years of his life?" Elena looked away, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her sleeve. "Nathaniel, she swallowed, her voice breaking. "I was scared." He stared at her, his chest tightening. "Scared of what?" She let out a breath, her shoulders sagging. "You were going to college. Nathaniel, you had your whole life ahead of you. You had dreams, ambitions that were bigger than this town. Bigger than me." He opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off. "I didn't want to be the reason you stopped chasing them." Nathaniel felt his heart shatter. "Elena," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "you didn't even give me a choice." She squeezed her eyes shut, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know." Nathaniel's chest ached. For the years lost. For the nights she must have spent alone. For the little boy sleeping in the next room who had never known he had a father. Nathaniel took a deep breath, stepping closer. "I don't care what your reasons were," he said, his voice steady. "I don't care about the past anymore. But from this moment forward, things are going to change." Elena wiped at her eyes, looking up at him. "What do you mean?" He held her gaze, unwavering. "I'm going to be in Leo's life," Nathaniel said, his voice firm with conviction. "No matter what it takes." Elena's lips parted, as if she wanted to argue. But then, her eyes softened, her defenses crumbling. She nodded. And just like that, the walls began to fall. "Nathaniel needs your support now more than ever. If you believe in second chances, in fighting for what truly matters, hit that like button. Comment below. If you were in Nathaniel's shoes, what would you do? Would you forgive Elena? Would you fight for Leo? Let us know. And if this story moved you, if you believe in the power of love, redemption, and family, subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. Because sometimes, the most important battles aren't about money or power. They're about the people we love. And Nathaniel? His fight has only just begun. Nathaniel Cole had spent his entire life fighting battles he knew he could win. He had walked into corporate war zones, dismantled empires with a single strategic move, and faced ruthless competitors without ever flinching. He had built his life on certainty, control, and power, on knowing the rules of the game and bending them in his favor. But this was different. This wasn't a hostile takeover. This wasn't a boardroom standoff. This was his son. And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel had no blueprint, no strategy, no roadmap for what came next. For 8 years, he had been absent from Leo's life, not by choice, but because someone else had made the choice for him. And now, that someone was standing in front of him, silent and guilty, her arms wrapped around herself like she was bracing for a storm she could no longer outrun. Elena Monroe, the woman who had once been his entire world. The woman who had looked him in the eyes and lied to his face, not out of malice, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. And Nathaniel didn't know what to do with that. He wanted to be angry. He had every right to be. But as he stood in Elena's small apartment, staring at the woman who had raised their son alone, who had sacrificed sleep, money, and stability just to give Leo the best life she could, his anger didn't feel like enough anymore. It felt small, because the truth was, he wasn't the only one who had lost something. Elena had lost too. She had spent 8 years looking at a boy who had his father's eyes, knowing that someday, this moment would come. She had spent 8 years carrying a secret too heavy to hold alone. And now, it was breaking her. Nathaniel could see it, the exhaustion in her face, the quiet way she folded into herself, as if expecting him to yell, to demand explanations, to punish her for the years she had stolen from him. But he didn't want to yell. He just wanted the truth. So he took a slow breath, steadying himself, and said the only thing that mattered. I want to meet him. Elena's head snapped up, her breath hitching. Panic flickered across her face. Nathaniel. No, he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. No more excuses. Elena. No more waiting. No more deciding what's best for me. His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. You made that choice once. And I lost 8 years because of it. I won't lose another second. Elena's lips trembled, her arms tightening around herself. He doesn't know you, she whispered. To him, you're just a stranger. Nathaniel nodded, accepting the truth like a knife to the gut. I know that, he said quietly. And I know that you're scared. But I'm not here to take him from you. I just want to know him. Elena swallowed hard, her walls cracking. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, she exhaled shakily and nodded. And just like that, the door to his son's world, to the life Nathaniel should have been a part of from the very beginning, opened. Nathaniel had prepared himself for this moment. Or at least, he thought he had. But the second he saw Leo standing in the hallway, all preparation crumbled into nothing. The boy looked up at him, blinking curiously, a comic book clutched in one small hand. And Nathaniel, a man who had faced some of the most powerful people in the world without fear, felt his chest tighten with something terrifyingly real. He had seen pictures of Leo, had spent hours staring at the boy's face, trying to memorize the details he had missed. But seeing him in person was something else entirely. Leo's hair was slightly tousled, his pajamas wrinkled from sleep. He had Elena's soft features. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were his. Nathaniel felt like he was looking at a reflection of his younger self. At a life that had existed without him. And the weight of it stole his breath. Leo frowned slightly, glancing up at Elena. Mom? Elena's voice was gentle, hesitant. Sweetheart, this is... She faltered, looking at Nathaniel, her lips parting, but no words came out. Because how did you introduce a father a child had never met? How did you say, this is your dad, the man you never knew existed? The man who should have been here all along. Nathaniel's throat tightened. He had never been good at words. So he crouched down, keeping his voice soft, careful. Hey, Leo. The boy's eyes widened slightly, startled to hear his name from a stranger's lips. Nathaniel hesitated, searching for something, anything, to say. But Leo beat him to it. You're the guy from the park. Nathaniel exhaled a quiet laugh, his lips twitching into a small, shaky smile. Yeah, he said, that's me. Leo tilted his head, his curiosity outweighing his hesitation. You know my mom? Nathaniel's chest ached. Yeah, he said, his voice quieter now. A long time ago. Leo studied him for a moment, eyes narrowing slightly, and Nathaniel swore he could see the gears turning in the boy's head. Are you? Leo's small brow furrowed. Are you my dad? Nathaniel froze. His heart stopped. Elena let out a quiet breath, her fingers gripping the hem of her sweater. Nathaniel couldn't look away from Leo's face. He could lie. It would be easier. He could tell the boy they were just friends, that he was just someone from the past. But hadn't he lost enough time already? So, with a deep breath, he told the truth. Yes, he said, his voice thick with more emotions than he could name. I am. Leo didn't speak, didn't move. For a moment, Nathaniel thought the boy was going to run, that he had made a mistake, that he had ruined whatever fragile chance he had been given. But then, so quietly it was almost inaudible, Leo whispered, "Where were you?" And Nathaniel broke. His chest caved in. The guilt, the grief, the regret crushing him under its weight. There were 1,000 answers he could give, 1,000 excuses. But Leo didn't need excuses. He needed the truth. So Nathaniel swallowed past the lump in his throat and said, "I didn't know about you." Leo's lips parted slightly. And for the first time, he looked hurt. You didn't know? Nathaniel's voice wavered. No, buddy, I didn't. Leo blinked, digesting that. Then, after what felt like an eternity, "Are you gonna stay?" Nathaniel felt his heart shatter all over again. Because he knew, without a doubt, that Leo had asked that question before. To people who had left. To people who hadn't stayed. And Nathaniel? He would never leave again. So he took a slow, shaky breath, looked into his son's hopeful, hesitant eyes, and said the only thing that mattered. I'm not going anywhere. If this moment moved you, if you believe in second chances and the power of love, hit that like button. Comment below. What would you say if you were Nathaniel? How would you make up for lost time? Let us know. And if you want to see what happens next, subscribe for more. Because sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought in boardrooms. They're fought for the people we love. And Nathaniel? His fight has only just begun. Nathaniel Cole had spent his entire life winning. He had built a tech empire from the ground up, amassed a fortune that most people could only dream of, and secured his name among the most powerful men in the world. And yet, as he stood in the park watching his son toss a frisbee to their dog, he realized that for the first time in his life, winning didn't matter. This wasn't about power. This wasn't about control. This was about Leo, a boy who had spent 8 years without him. A boy who, just days ago, hadn't even known his name. Nathaniel had walked into this journey believing that he could fix things quickly. That time lost could be made up for with effort. That his presence alone would be enough. But fatherhood wasn't a business deal. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about showing up. Every single day. And as much as he wanted to dive in headfirst, to make up for every missed birthday, every lost bedtime story, every scraped knee that he hadn't been there to kiss better, Leo didn't trust him yet. Nathaniel felt it in the way the boy kept his distance. In the hesitation that flickered in his eyes when they talked. He had every right to be cautious. Nathaniel had missed his entire life. And even though it wasn't his fault, even though he had never known Leo existed, it didn't erase the fact that he had been absent. And now, Leo had to decide if he wanted to let him in. Nathaniel didn't blame him for hesitating. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. The first time Nathaniel picked Leo up from school, the boy barely spoke to him. Nathaniel had arrived early, standing by the entrance, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets as he watched the children rush out in waves of laughter and chatter. And then, there he was. Leo, his son, a backpack slung over one shoulder, his hair a little messy from the day, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on him. Nathaniel expected a smile, but instead, Leo hesitated. Something flickered across his face, uncertainty, discomfort, maybe even fear, and it hit Nathaniel like a punch to the gut. Leo didn't know how to act around him yet. Didn't know if it was okay to be excited. If it was okay to trust that Nathaniel would actually be there tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. Nathaniel forced a small smile, lifting a hand in an awkward wave. Leo approached slowly, his fingers tightening on the straps of his backpack. Hey, buddy, Nathaniel said carefully. How was school? Leo shrugged. It was okay. Silence. Nathaniel cleared his throat. Well, I was thinking, maybe we could get ice cream? If you want. Leo blinked, considering. Then, finally, he gave a small nod. Okay, he murmured. And Nathaniel swore he could breathe again. The first time Leo reached for his hand, Nathaniel almost cried. It wasn't planned. It wasn't a big moment. They had been walking through the park. Leo chattering about a new video game. His voice growing more animated, more comfortable. And then, without thinking, without hesitation, he slipped his small hand into Nathaniel's. Nathaniel froze. It was instinctive, natural, the kind of thing that should have always been there, but wasn't. Because he had missed it. Because he hadn't been there. Nathaniel swallowed hard, keeping his voice steady. Your hands are freezing, kid. Leo giggled. Yeah. Nathaniel tightened his grip just slightly, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in a long time. And for the first time since finding out about his son, he realized that this wasn't about making up for the past. It was about being here now. But not every moment was easy. There were days when Leo wouldn't talk to him at all. Days when the walls between them felt too high, too thick, too impossible to climb over. One night, after a quiet dinner, Leo sat curled on the couch, staring at the TV but not really watching it. Nathaniel sat beside him, hesitant, careful. Leo? The boy didn't look at him. Yeah? Nathaniel exhaled. Is something wrong? Leo shrugged. I dunno. Nathaniel hesitated. You can tell me. You know. You can ask me anything. Silence. And then, so quietly it almost wasn't there. Why didn't you look for me? Nathaniel's chest caved in. He felt the breath leave his lungs. The weight of 8 years crashing down on him all at once. I didn't know about you, buddy, he said softly. If I had, I swear, I would have looked for you. I would have found you. Leo was silent for a long time. Then, finally, he whispered, oh, and Nathaniel knew. That wound wasn't going to heal overnight. But he would do everything in his power to prove to Leo that he wasn't going anywhere. The first time Leo called him Dad, it happened by accident. They had been playing with Duke in the park, tossing a frisbee back and forth. Leo had thrown it too far, and Nathaniel had run after it, laughing. Nice throw, buddy, he called. And Leo, without thinking, without hesitation, had shouted back, thanks, Dad. Nathaniel stopped mid-step. The word hung in the air between them, weighty and fragile and perfect all at once. Leo froze, realizing what he had just said, his cheeks flushing red. For a second, Nathaniel was afraid he'd take it back, that he would panic and say it was a mistake. But instead, Leo just smiled. Nathaniel's heart clenched, his throat tightening, and when he smiled back, it was the most natural thing in the world. This journey wasn't perfect. It was messy, painful, full of moments where they both felt like strangers trying to piece together something that should have been there all along. But they were trying, and they were choosing each other, every single day. And in the end, maybe that was what really mattered. Maybe it wasn't about making up for the years lost. Maybe it was about the years they still had ahead of them. Nathaniel Cole never thought he would find himself here, not just standing in this cozy little apartment. Not just sitting on a well-worn couch that had undoubtedly been the center of countless bedtime stories. But in this life, a life where he wasn't just a CEO, a billionaire, a man always chasing the next deal. A life where he was simply Dad. It still felt surreal. After 8 years of silence, of distance, of lost time. He was here, and Leo was looking at him like he belonged. But the truth was, he didn't, not yet. He had spent too long on the outside. Too long as a stranger. And even though Leo had started calling him Dad, even though he had started trusting him in small ways, holding his hand when they crossed the street, leaning into him when he was tired, laughing with him like it was the easiest thing in the world, Nathaniel knew that trust was fragile. And he was terrified of breaking it. The first time Leo called him to say goodnight, Nathaniel almost didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because, for a split second, he thought it was a mistake. His phone buzzed on his desk late at night, interrupting a meeting. When he saw Leo's name on the screen, his breath caught. For a moment, he just stared at it. Would answering make it real? Could he let himself hope that this was the start of something permanent? He excused himself from the meeting, stepped onto his balcony, and pressed accept. Hey, buddy, he said, keeping his voice steady. On the other end, Leo's voice was soft, hesitant. "Hi." Nathaniel smiled. "What's up?" Leo was quiet for a moment. Then, so softly, Nathaniel almost missed it. "Mom always tells me good night before bed. And I thought maybe you could too." Nathaniel closed his eyes, gripping the balcony railing. This boy, this incredible, strong, beautiful boy who had spent his whole life without a father, was offering him a place in his routine. A place in his heart. Nathaniel swallowed hard. "Of course, buddy. I'd love to." Leo exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath. And that sound alone almost broke Nathaniel. "Okay," Leo murmured. "Okay," Nathaniel echoed. "Good night, kiddo." "Good night, Dad." The call ended, but Nathaniel stood there for a long time, staring at the city skyline, realizing, maybe for the first time in his life, that success had never been about the boardrooms or the power. It had always been about this. But not every moment was perfect. Because healing wasn't a straight line. And trust? Trust took time. One night, Leo got mad at him for the first time. It was over something small. Nathaniel had forgotten about a school event. And by the time he showed up, Leo was already walking out with Elena. His son barely looked at him. Nathaniel rushed up, breathless. "Leo, buddy, I'm so sorry." Leo shrugged him off. "Whatever. It doesn't matter." But it did. Nathaniel could see it in his face. In the way his jaw was clenched. In the way his shoulders curled inward. Like he was trying to protect himself. And that was when it hit Nathaniel. Leo had been disappointed before. By people who said they would be there and weren't. By people who made promises they didn't keep. Nathaniel had never meant to be one of those people. But Leo didn't know that yet. Nathaniel crouched down, lowering his voice. "Hey," he said softly. "I messed up. I should have been here. And I wasn't. And that's not okay." Leo stared at the ground. Nathaniel hesitated. "Can I make it up to you?" Silence. Then, after a long pause, Leo shrugged. "Maybe." And that was enough. Because trust wasn't built in a single moment. It was built in the moments after you made a mistake, when you proved that you were still going to show up. Even when you got things wrong. The first time Elena let Nathaniel tuck Leo into bed, something in his chest cracked open. It was just another night. Just another part of the routine, but when she stepped aside, gesturing toward the bedroom, Nathaniel understood the weight of what she was giving him. This wasn't just about Leo. This was about her too. This was about trust. Nathaniel swallowed hard, nodding. "Thank you." Elena just smiled, but there was something soft, hesitant, and maybe even hopeful in her eyes. Nathaniel stepped into Leo's room. Careful, like he was walking into something sacred. Leo was already half asleep, curled up in his blankets. Nathaniel sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing a hand over his son's hair. His son. It still felt impossible. It still felt too good to be true. But it was real. And as he sat there, in the quiet glow of a nightlight, watching Leo drift to sleep, Nathaniel realized something. He had spent his whole life chasing the wrong things. Power, wealth, success. None of it had ever felt like this. This warmth, this love, this family. One evening, after Leo had gone to bed, Nathaniel and Elena sat together in the living room. For the first time in years. It wasn't tense. For the first time in years. There wasn't just history between them. There was something new. Nathaniel glanced at her. "I never thanked you." Elena raised a brow. "For what?" "For everything," he admitted. "For raising him. For giving him everything he needed. For being strong enough to do it alone." Elena looked down, biting her lip. Then, quietly, she said, "I didn't want to do it alone." Nathaniel's breath hitched. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she whispered. "But now, I don't know. Maybe I was just scared." Nathaniel reached over, covering her hand with his. "I was scared too," he admitted, "but I don't want to be scared anymore." Elena's gaze lifted, her dark eyes searching his. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel saw hope. Not just in her, but in both of them. This wasn't just about making up for lost time. It was about building something new. Something strong. Something that could last. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances, hit that like button. Comment below. What does forgiveness mean to you? Have you ever had to rebuild trust with someone you love? Let us know. And if you want to see what happens next, subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. Because sometimes, the most beautiful things come from the broken pieces. And Nathaniel? He's not just fixing the past. He's building a future. Nathaniel Cole had always believed that success meant certainty, that life was about careful planning, strategic decisions, and staying 3 steps ahead at all times. But here, in the quiet hum of Alina's small apartment, watching his son laugh at a cartoon on the TV, Nathaniel realized that the best things in life weren't planned. They were found. And sometimes, they were found after you thought you had lost them forever. For 8 years, he had lived in ignorance, never knowing that he had a son. For 8 years, he had thrown himself into work, believing that his empire was the only thing that mattered. But Leo changed everything. Leo, his son, his flesh and blood, a child who had his eyes and his stubbornness and his curiosity, had stepped into his life and shattered everything Nathaniel thought he knew about happiness. Because happiness wasn't found in a skyscraper office with a view of the city. It was here. It was in the way Leo reached for his hand when they crossed the street. It was in the way Elena watched them, soft and unguarded, like she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could be a family again. It was in the laughter that filled this tiny living room, louder and more real than anything Nathaniel had felt in years. This was what mattered. And he wasn't going to lose it again. The first time Nathaniel took Leo to his office, he was nervous, not about the people, not about the press, not about what anyone would say, but about Leo, because his son was still figuring him out, still learning how to trust him. And Nathaniel knew that one wrong move, one mistake, could send everything crumbling down. Leo sat beside him in the backseat of the car, his sneakers swinging slightly over the edge of the leather seat. He was quiet, fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. Nathaniel glanced at him. "You okay, buddy?" Leo shrugged. "I dunno." Nathaniel waited, giving him space. Then, after a moment, so quietly it almost wasn't there. "What if your work people don't like me?" Nathaniel's breath caught. For all of Leo's confidence, for all of his bright energy, there was still fear in him. Fear of being too much. Fear of being left behind. Nathaniel swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Hey," he said, his voice steady. "You know what I tell everyone at work?" Leo shook his head. Nathaniel smiled. "That I'm the boss." Leo's eyes widened slightly. "Yeah? Yeah." Nathaniel chuckled. "And if the boss says you belong, then guess what?" Leo bit his lip, thinking, "I belong?" Nathaniel nodded. Leo grinned, small and shy, but real. And when they stepped out of the car together, when Nathaniel led him through the towering doors of Cold Tech, hand in hand, he knew they were taking another step forward. One step at a time. Not everything was perfect. There were still moments of hesitation. Still moments when Leo seemed unsure. There were still long nights where Nathaniel sat awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was doing enough, if he was making up for what had been lost. And there was still Elena. Still the weight of their past. The choices that had pulled them apart. But there was also something new between them. A quiet understanding. A shared love for their son. And a slow, cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still something left between them. One night, after Leo had gone to bed, they sat together on the couch. Not as strangers. Not as the people they had been when they were young and reckless and in love. But as two people who had been broken apart and put back together in a way neither of them had expected. Nathaniel hesitated, staring down at his hands. "Elena," his voice was soft, careful. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" She exhaled, her lips curving into something almost sad. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I try not to." Nathaniel nodded, understanding, but then she turned to him, her dark eyes searching his. "I do think about what could be," she said softly. Nathaniel's breath hitched, and for the first time in years, he let himself hope, not just for Leo, not just for fatherhood, but for this, for a future where they weren't just co-parents, where they weren't just people linked by the past, but where they were something more. Something real. The first time Leo called him, just because he wanted to talk, Nathaniel almost cried. It was the middle of the day. He was in the office, buried in work, his mind lost in the world of business and deadlines and meetings. And then his phone rang. Leo's name flashed across the screen. Nathaniel immediately answered. "Hey, buddy." "Hi," Leo said. "I just wanted to tell you something." Nathaniel smiled, leaning back in his chair. What's up? Leo hesitated. Then, in a voice so small but so certain, I like having you around. Nathaniel's chest ached. He swallowed hard. Yeah, Leo said. You're kinda cool, I guess. Nathaniel laughed, blinking back something dangerously close to tears. Thanks, kid, he murmured. I like having you around too. It wasn't about making up for the past anymore. It was about the future. A future where Leo never had to wonder if his father would be there. A future where Nathaniel didn't just call himself a father, but proved it every single day. A future where Elena wasn't just the woman he had lost, but the woman he was finding again. One moment at a time. One step at a time. Because sometimes, life doesn't give you do-overs. But if you're lucky, it gives you second chances. And this? This was his. Nathaniel Cole had spent years believing that success was about power. About control. About winning. He had built an empire from nothing. Created a name for himself in a world that demanded perfection. And shaped his future with his own hands. But nothing had prepared him for the realization that the greatest success of his life had nothing to do with business. It was here, in this small, warm apartment, where his son was curled up on the couch, laughing at a cartoon. In the quiet, hesitant glances between him and Elena, filled with a history neither of them could erase. But also something new, a future that wasn't written yet. In the simple, unshakable fact that after years of being alone, Nathaniel wasn't alone anymore. He had a son. He had a family. And this time, he wasn't going to lose them. The morning was crisp and bright as Nathaniel sat on a park bench, watching Leo toss a ball to Duke. The golden sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow over everything. And for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel felt at peace. Elena sat beside him, arms crossed, watching their son with the same quiet awe that Nathaniel felt every time he looked at him. It was still strange, still new, the idea that this was his life now. But it was a good kind of strange. Nathaniel glanced at Elena. I don't think I ever thanked you. She raised a brow. For what? For everything, he said, his voice softer now. For raising him. For being strong enough to do it alone. For giving him everything he needed when I wasn't there. Elena looked down, biting her lip. I didn't want to do it alone, she admitted. Nathaniel swallowed hard. She met his gaze then, her dark eyes searching his. But I don't want to do it alone anymore. Either. Nathaniel's breath hitched. He didn't move, didn't speak, because this was it. This was the moment that changed everything. Not just for him, for them. That night, as Nathaniel tucked Leo into bed, his son looked up at him sleepily and said something that would stay with him forever. I'm glad you found us. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. I'm glad I did too. Buddy, he murmured, brushing a hand over Leo's hair. More than anything, Leo yawned, curling into his blankets. Are you staying forever? Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Yes, he whispered. Forever. And that's what this story is about. It's about second chances. It's about realizing that life doesn't always go the way you planned. But that doesn't mean you've lost your chance at happiness. It's about making things right, even when it feels impossible. It's about showing up, not just once, but every day. And it's about love, the kind that doesn't fade with time. The kind that waits. The kind that gives you another shot when you least expect it. Maybe you've lost something. Maybe you've walked away from people you loved. Maybe you think it's too late. But if Nathaniel's story teaches us anything, it's that it's never too late to fight for what matters. It's never too late to choose love. And it's never too late to be the person you were meant to be. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances, hit that like button. Comment below. What does family mean to you? Have you ever been given a second chance at something important? Let us know. And if you want to see more stories like this, stories about love, about redemption, about the moments that change our lives forever, subscribe to our channel. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones that find us when we need them the most. And Nathaniel? He found his. Maybe it's time for you to find yours, too.